Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, what is up? What is good? The king. Yeah, the king of lightning here today, bringing you guys and gals a one-piece discussion video on the Kong organ, the Gear 4th version of the Gomu Gomu no Gatling. And apparently, I wasn't aware of this until recently on Twitter, but apparently there is a discussion around the Kong organ. And a lot of folks seem to be confused about it, to the point where many folks are saying that the Kong organ is a sign of Luffy awakening in some way, shape, or form, and Oda's kind of hit it when it comes to Luffy's abilities, which I find very intriguing, because I don't think that's the case at all, but I can see why folks are thinking that, because when we see the Kong organ, from a foundational standpoint, it appears to be very different than the rest of the Gatlings, but I'll explain why very briefly. So first and foremost, let's take a look at the Gatlings of Monkey D. Luffy. First of all, we have your base form Gatling. Then you have your Gear 2 Gatling, the Jet Gatling. Then you have the Gear 3 Elephant Gun Gatling. We don't see this version of the Gatling without Armored Haki. We always see it with Armored Haki, though it's only been done very few times in the series. And then finally we have our Gear 4th version of the Gatling, the Kong organ. Now, first and foremost, the organ itself is actually modeled after a multiple barrel cannon, which apparently they existed, which is pretty crazy, but it's modeled after that. And as you can tell via the model, it has several cannon barrels that fire off their cannon rounds, and the organ, again, is based off of that. When it comes from a foundational standpoint, the organ does look very different because it appears that Luffy attains 2 extra sets of arms, so he has 6 arms total. How are we sleeping on Luffy gaining 4 extra arms? That should be big news, Page and Morgan's. Yo, Luffy has 6 arms. Front page, Luffy has 6 arms. However, the reality is, the Kong organ, though powerful, is not big news. It's not Morgan's worthy. And the reason why I think is fairly simple. When you look at the base form Luffy and the Gear 2nd Luffy, the Gatlings are pretty obvious to where the origin of the force comes from. What is driving behind the force of the punches? And that is Luffy's shoulders and his lats. And it's very apparent when he uses it against Rob Lucci, to where he's cocking back and then he has to drive the punches. When it comes to the Gatling in base form and in Gear 2nd, the Jet Gatling, once again, the majority of the force, what's driving the punches, are his lats, his shoulders, and you can see how he has to drive. Sometimes he's standing still, but overall, it's the shoulders that are driving the power behind those punches. Because remember that when he fires the fist has to come back to him, and in order to do so, the shoulders are, again, the pivot for that. Now, when it comes to Gear 3 is a bit different. Because Gear 3, he has this giant mass that is focused on one part of his body, his arm. And even though the shoulders are a clear component when it comes to the driving force of the Elephant Gatling, it's also a wrecking ball type of component, where Luffy has to bring his arms all the way back, and then he has to fire off and then bring it all the way back, because that's how he's able to move that giant mass around in such rapid fire succession. We see that when he's destroying the Noah ship, where the fists are kind of coming from behind him, because he has to bring his fists all the way back, and then he has to propel them forward, because they're pretty much like wrecking balls. The inflated bones, though air, they do seem to have more mass, Case in point, when he hits Rob Lucci with Gear 3 for the first time, as opposed to the regular pistol, which does almost like no damage to Rob Lucci in that transformed state, the giant pistol does a crap ton of damage, and that's because it has more force. Why? Not because of the acceleration, because the acceleration seems to be the same as the regular pistol, but it's the increase in mass. So the increase in mass and it being focused to one part of his body, he has to bring his arms back and then forward in wrecking ball fashion. Now when it comes to Gear 4th, it's completely different than the rest of the gears, because the driving force of his attacks is not, let's say, the shoulders or the lats or the torso where he has to torque sometimes. No. What is the reality is the contraction and the expansion of his rubber by using armored hockey. As Doflamingo said, the Gear 4th is a state where he's harmonizing rubber and armored hockey. In a sense, it's the compression. It's the compression of his fist into his own forearm, which is the driving point of the force. And that is a component of the expansion, the contraction of the rubber, the armored hockey, which is why he lacks the elasticity, but he has way more power, way more force in comparison. Granted, he does have the Calverin where it does appear to be very elastic and it does bounce off the air, kind of like Genpo specifically for his arm, and that comes from the armored hockey harmonizing with the rubber, where it is hard. It's very hard.
Good old rub.
But at the same time, it maintains its elasticity. You have Flamingo who tried to cut through Luffy, but he couldn't. You can see how the attack kind of goes into Luffy's body when Flamingo attacks him because it has elasticity. So when it comes to the organ, there is 0 point in Luffy trying to use his shoulders as the focus point of where the force is coming from, the force that drives his attacks, because that's not where the power is coming from. The power is coming from the contraction and the expansion of Luffy's own fist into his own forearm. It sucks in. It sucks in quite late. So what Luffy is doing when it comes to these 6 arms is a sub-Gatling. It's a sub-Gatling before the actual attack itself. He makes several of his arms sideways, horizontally, and that's the sub-Gatling. So the only time the shoulders are being used is when he makes the after images of his arms. He's not actually growing new arms. He's making after images of his own arms. Several of them, because again, the focus point here is not his shoulders or his lats, it's the suction of his fist once again into his forearm. So consider this. If Luffy did try and use the Gatling version of Gear 4th, like he would the other gears, first you have to use his shoulders like he normally would, then you have to suck in his arms into his forearm, then you have to fire off, and then once the arms come back, he has to suck in again, and then fire. No, it's way too inconvenient. It wouldn't be a Gatling. At least it wouldn't be comparable to the Gatlings that we see in the other gear forms. For him to keep on doing that, the re-sucking and then the firing off, it wouldn't make any sense. So it makes far more sense if he makes several of his base arms the way they are, that sub-Gatling, and then with that sub-Gatling, with the 6 arms, then he fires the Kong gun from those individual arms, which makes the Kong organ. So that's happening when it comes to Luffy and the Kong organ. So in conclusion, there's not a hidden awakening when it comes to Luffy at this point in time, in particular when it comes to the Kong organ. And consider the fact that when it comes to something new, when it comes to Luffy's abilities, Oda makes a big deal of that. Whether it was Gear 2nd, whether it was Gear 3, whether it was Gear 4, obviously, Oda made a very big deal of that, and he would highlight that greatly. When it comes to an awakening of any type with Luffy, first of all, he should follow the Norm Paramecia trend. He should. I can't say that this is a de facto thing, but from all of the awakenings that we see thus far, the Paramecia control the environment around them. Him growing extra arms wouldn't fit the awakening mold that we see thus far. And number 2, if this was Oda's attempt to try and hide Luffy's awakening, then
suboptimal.
not necessarily a good job in hiding it. It's very obvious that we're seeing multiple arms form from Luffy's side. Either it's an awakening of some kind, but Luffy's not aware of that, and or it's after images, which is, again, far more likely because it's the sub-Gatling before he fires off several Kong guns from each of the arms. That makes way more sense. But if Oda's trying to hide that, then not really a good job in hiding it. He could do much better. We've seen Oda do way better when it comes to foreshadowing, when it comes to hiding certain hints here or there into the story that become big later on in the story. We've seen him do way better. So, that being said, guys and gals, I am done. Let me know your thoughts on the matter at hand. You know where I stand when it comes to Kong Organ. Once again, it is a sub-Gatling, after images, 6 arms total. He fires off Kong guns from those arms, and voila, you have the Gear 4th version of the Gomu Gomu no Gatling, because the force that drives behind the attacks is not his shoulders, it's not his lats, it's not his torso, none of that. It is the expansion and contraction of rubber via arm and hockey, because he is harmonizing arm and hockey with rubber. It is the compression, it is the suction of his own hand into his own forearm, into his own arm, and that is what's driving the force behind the attacks. Now, before you go, be sure to rate the video. It is not that hard to do. I guarantee you that, because I know that you all have a device called Zamaosu, and you use Zamaosu to click, rate the video, to click, subscribe, to click on that bell to join the squad, and of course, comment in the comment section down below. Peace, and have a nice goddamn day.